Record. Hey guys, well, thank you for hanging out with me today. This is Britt, and my hope, just with everything that's taking place with the Black Lives Matter movement and racial injustice and getting justice and all of that, is to keep the conversation going. And so I recognize there's a lot of conversations to be had around this topic, and I've invited my friend Chris to join me today. And Chris, I just know, since I've met you, you've had a heart for this topic. I don't know if you remember, but the first time I met you was at a Dialogues on Race event. And it was last summer in August, and I was just home visiting. I hadn't moved back yet. And so that was the first time that I was like, man, this guy really loves this topic. And you're a white man, and I think it will be great for people to see just white men talk on this. And so let's start. Tell them who you are. Tell them one fun fact about you, and then go ahead, walk us through the doohickey you set up before the call.
Sure. I'm Chris Kubic. I'm a Zion resident. I've lived here for 16 years. My wife actually grew up here, and so we've returned to her hometown, and I've been involved in community work for a long time. Many thanks to your mom for getting me started on that. There's this great story about how she found me and sat in my driveway until I got home, which was awkward, but shouldn't surprise anybody. So that's how it all got started. So she is either to be credited or blamed for all of this. But yeah, the racial dialogues from a couple summers ago, it was fantastic. We had 150 participants from all kinds of different backgrounds. It was really cool. We had people from the Black Lives Matter organization sitting next to law enforcement and dialoguing. And that was the whole point, is dialogue and keeping the conversations going. And that's really where my heart is in this. I'm not trying to say that I have reached some pinnacle of enlightenment and now everybody should sit at my feet and listen to me. But I've had these aha moments in my journey. And if I can share those with other people to help them overcome some of the challenges and setbacks that I've had in understanding what all this talk about race is about, that's what I want to do.
Good deal.
Cool. So the doohickeys, I have two little kids, and I'm not ashamed to say that I borrowed some of their toys. This is an illustration of keeping the conversation going. And honestly, Britt, I'm worried because it's not necessarily new, but it's gotten worse lately. There's just not enough dialogue and civil discourse. There's so many assumptions and, oh, you're one of those, I know what you're going to say, I don't want to talk to you. And making these assumptions, and then we're not talking. And I'll show you what it looks like in this little simulation here.
Yeah.
So let's say that these two are on the political left. This is Thomas, and this is Toad. And then these two are on the political right. This is Kitty, and this is Ashima. And so what's happening is you get these assumptions that everybody on the left believes the same thing, and everybody on the right believes the same thing. And I think we know in our head that that's not right, but that's kind of how it happens. And so the problem is Ashima has a really strong opinion, a very, not strong, but extreme, a very politically extreme opinion. So she's all the way over here, like off the camera over here. Well, Kitty also has a conservative opinion, but is more moderate. So she's more toward the middle. Same over here. Thomas is moderate, Toad is way over here. And so you can't assume that Thomas and Toad agree just because they're on the same side. You can't assume that these agree.
Yeah.
So what's happening is this side is saying, oh, you're one of those, you're on that side, I know what you're going to say, I don't want to talk to you. Well, no, you don't, because these two would say two different things.
Right.
Oftentimes, folks on one side will assume that they're talking to somebody with a really extreme opinion, but they're not. They're talk to somebody with a more moderate opinion. These two actually have quite a bit in common.
Right.
But that conversation never happens because of the assumption, oh, you're on that side, I know what you're going to say. So take something out of the news now, this idea of reforming or defunding the police.
Yeah.
So it's a liberal opinion. Let's just call it a liberal opinion. The idea of getting rid of all police, that's a really extreme opinion. That's over here. Right. The idea of reforming the police is a moderate opinion, and that's over here. Right. So you can't, if you're on this side, you can't say, oh, Thomas, I don't want to talk to you. You want to get rid of all police. Wait. No, I don't. I want to reform police. This guy wants to get rid of all police. It's not the same.
Yeah.
That conversation never happens. I found out that defunding the police doesn't mean getting rid of all funding. and getting rid of police. It means reallocating funding and kind of reimagining what the role of the police is. But it doesn't mean getting rid of the police.
Yeah.
You know, seeing in the news that, oh, you want to get rid of all police, you want to defund police and not have them? Well, no, 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 no.
That's not what it means.
Right.
Hmm.
We have to make sure that we're keeping the dialogue going
Yeah.
and talking about it, because these two might actually have some things in common.
Yeah.
So I did the left side. On the right side, maybe this extreme opinion says law enforcement is always right. I will always protect them. And no, whatever. I'm not going to listen to any criticism about the police. And this person is less extreme in that opinion. Right. So again, these two have a lot in common, but they're not going to have that conversation if they assume that they're talking to the more extreme position. Right. The other thing that bothers me is not only does this dialogue get shut down, but look what happens. Who's the only one left for Toad to talk to? Mm. The other side won't talk to, I'm sorry, for Thomas to talk to. The only person left, nobody on this side will talk to him. That's how people get pulled into more extreme kind of things once that dialogue gets shut down. So I would encourage people to keep the dialogue going. Catch yourself making those assumptions that, oh, you're one of those, I know what you're going to say. And make sure that you're clarifying the terms. Like with the defunding, I think the first question is, wait, what do you mean by defunding?
Right.
What do you mean by Black Lives Matter? What do you mean by Blue Lives Matter? What do you mean by privilege, race, racism, whatever? Clarify the terms and make sure you know what you're talking about before you get into this whole argument and then, oh, wait, that's not what you mean?
Right, yeah. Yep. And there are those trigger words too. And I know we talked about this on the phone the other day. There's these trigger words, especially in white people, that we don't really necessarily know. And so we're shutting the conversation down before it's begun, without giving people room to say, wait a second, there is more. And so I would love for you to kind of just walk us through maybe some of those more trigger words that do pull us into those extremes.
Yeah, I can speak from my own experience. Privilege used to be one of them. I used to get really defensive when people talked about white privilege or male privilege or any privilege that I had, because I assumed that it meant that I was racist or sexist and everything was handed to me and everything was easy. And that's not what it means. It just means an advantage. But once I kind of got over that defensive reaction and listened again, rather than just making assumptions, oh, you're talking about privilege, I know what you're going to say. Well, no, I didn't. And once I listened, I realized, okay, privilege is a set of advantages. So when we talk about white privilege, it doesn't mean that everything was handed to me and everything was easy and I never had challenges or difficulties. It just means that my skin was usually not one of those difficulties.
Right.
Okay, well, that's a different conversation. Right. So that's one of those words that tripped me up.
Yeah.
It was a conversation with a friend, a Black friend. I'll tell you that story in a minute, but it was also a simulation in graduate school. And again, I can illustrate with these guys because I like to play with toys. So we'll move Ashima out for a minute. Let's say, and this is how it worked in the classroom. It's more fun in the classroom, but I'm in the basement and it's not going to work. So everybody was to crumple up some paper balls, like 4 or 5 of them. And then the professor put the recycling bin on one side of the room and we all had to throw the balls in the recycling bin. So it is kind of funny, paper balls flying everywhere. But the bin was on one side of the room. So a few students, literally all they had to do was reach over their desk and drop the ball in. Mm-hmm. The other side of the room had to throw the ball all the way across the room, which again was fun, but we were supposed to keep score. And so the score after the first round was really disjointed. And then the professor was like, you know what? That was wrong. And that's not fair to some of you. Let me make it right. And then she put the recycling bin right in the middle. So everything was equal. Right. And then continued and things evened out. But she made the point that, even though everything was equal, the score didn't reset. And so the advantages and disadvantages that came from the earlier round still came about. So I can show you here.
Wow.
Toad and Kitty and Thomas are playing this basketball game, and I put the bucket right here.
Right.
So Thomas is going to have an easier time than Toad and Kitty. So after the first round, let's say the score is 9. We'll say Thomas missed 1 easy bucket. 9-5 to 1. Kitty got lucky with one of those across the room shots. And then I'm like, yeah, that's not right. Let me make it equal. So I rearranged things, put the bucket right in the middle, and now, okay, keep going.
Yeah.
And the score didn't reset. So the score, when everything was made equal, is still 9 to 5 to 1. And
Yeah.
so there's no way that Kitty is going to overcome that.
Mhm.
So in terms of history, and I'm just summarizing, there are definitely better resources than me out there, but the discrimination against especially African Americans was completely legal all
Yeah.
the way to the 1960s in terms of housing. And so there was a policy, there were many policies, but one was redlining.
Mhm.
And literally they would draw on a map in red where Black people could purchase houses and where they would grant loans. And then white people had all this other freedom of movement.
Mhm.
So that's partially why there's Black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods. And then it's not just about where you live, it's about accruing wealth.
Right.
In those Black neighborhoods, the property values were lower.
Yep.
They didn't move around as much. In the white areas, the property values tended to be higher and they could move. So
Yeah.
in the course of an adult's life, they could move, they could accrue more wealth, build equity, and then pass that on to the next generation. So the Black folks couldn't. So
Right.
it was illegalized in the 1960s.
Yep.
It didn't erase those historical disadvantages and advantages.
It didn't. And even so I live in Zion as well, and I was noticing this the other day, is like I see the red line in our own community, and we have done probably more work than a lot of communities in trying to keep this conversation. And the police chief in our life, I mean, they're just all about this conversation. But even in my own neighborhood, because most of our grandparents built these houses. And so I mean, there is Latino and a few Black in our community, but it's predominantly white in this little section of the neighborhood. But if I go 2 blocks over to the right, it's predominantly Black. And I think I've always just thought, oh, this is just how it is. This is like the normal. This is what people like. But the more I learn, the more I'm understanding. I'm like, we were a red line district before we were having a conversation. And now how do we, and I don't even know if you have some insight into this, like how do we as people help address redlining?
Redlining itself, I'm not sure I have any specific insights about that, but I think we need to be more aware of why the problems that plague our society exist.
Yeah.
There's always a conversation about poverty when you talk about race, and people want to say that, oh, that the problems in let's say the Black community are because of poverty, not because of race. Well, yeah, but you can't separate the two because of that historical thing, the historical problems and the inability to move around and accrue wealth and get good educations.
Yeah.
Those problems persist, and so people of color are locked into poverty. So yeah, crime and other things, that is a function of poverty. It's not race, but because of this historical stuff, people of color are trapped in poverty at a disproportionate rate. Doesn't mean there aren't poor white people.
Right.
Doesn't mean there aren't rich people of color, but generally they're trapped in poverty. And so that's why these problems plague the communities of color more so than whites. It has everything to do with history. So we can't say, well, don't bring up slavery, don't bring up Jim Crow because that was in the past and everything's better. Well, yeah, things are better, but it still matters. So I think understanding the history of it, and then we also need to get better at diversifying positions of power.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's strange for me as a white person who's in a position of power to say, well, we need fewer white people and more people of color in there.
Right.
And I'm actively trying to do that. But if we can't get people of color in power, can we at least get them a seat at the table?
Right. Yeah.
So we need to encourage people of color to run for office and be in positions of power and go in the hiring pipeline toward positions of power. But then also things like school board meetings and just activities at the school. Generally, again, it's not all the time, but people of color may not feel comfortable going there, even though the invitation is for everybody.
Right.
They feel like, well, yeah, I can go, but there's going to be kind of like, what are they doing here?
Oddball out. Yeah.
There's the angry Black woman, you know, and so they don't feel fully comfortable.
Right.
But I think if we can establish relationships of trust, if we as white people can establish relationships of trust with people of color, and we can invite them in. I think there's a big difference between, hey, anybody come, and hey, I'll go with you. Come on with me.
Absolutely. Well, and I know we talked about this the other day as well, of like, this might be the first time I've ever correlated a responsibility with civic duty. Like, and I know it sounds, we grow up reading, you know, constitutions and like, oh, you have a voice in America and all of that. But as a millennial, and I speaking for most millennials, we are very much of like, I'm going to start this business and I'm going to run this business and I'm not going to report to anybody. That's like a very millennial mindset. This is generally speaking. And there's all of a sudden this voice that we're like, wait a second, if we don't put ourselves in places of power, we can't influence change. Where your Facebook status is cute, but you've got to be in a position to make decisions. And so one question I've been wrestling with lately is, how do we elevate people of color to positions of power while using our white privilege to navigate the conversation? I know it sounds like a very weird dynamic, but it feels like in a lot of conversations, white people as a whole, we're at this pivot point where we have to say that we are anti-racist and we will move the agenda forward until those voices are heard. So give me some thoughts on that.
Well, I think if you're in a position of power as a white person, I think you need to advocate for people of color. So if decisions are being made that you know are going to impact people of color, make sure there are people of color at the table. If they're not, then maybe you can pause the meeting and wait a second. Can we table this until we can check on this or that or that? You know, the response to Hurricane Katrina made me think of that. Spike Lee did a great documentary called When the Levees Broke. And, you know, going back to my illustration here, I think if I'm interpreting it right, his opinion is pretty extreme that it was deliberately racist. There's a lot of black people there. We're going to destroy that area. I don't know if I believe that, but at least some of the decisions that were made.
Hang on, guys. I lost him for a second. He'll come back, I swear. I hope he'll come back. There you go. Now you're back.
Did I cut
out now?
Okay. So just as white people in power, advocating to have diversity at the table helps. I want to go back to that invitation thing, and I'll use a silly example from my life. I used to play a lot of basketball, and I used to play because I used to be a youth minister, and most of my congregation was from one family. They were all cousins, and most of them are gigantic, like 6'6", 6'7", you know. So it'd always be funny, me going on the basketball court with them. People are like, which of these is not like the other? What are you doing? And so even after the youth group, my friend Jerry and I would play basketball, and I was just not confident enough to approach a bunch of guys playing basketball and be like, all right, I got next. Can I play? But when he's there and he invites me, because of his size, you know, it's 6'6" guy, I want him on the team. So I think when he invites me, it makes me feel better. And nobody ever said, we don't want you here, but I just didn't feel comfortable.
Right.
And I wonder if people of color may feel that way, that, yeah, technically I'm invited, but I just don't feel comfortable. So again, establishing that relationship and inviting them and helping to amplify the voices, I think history matters.
Yeah.
Given the history of how public education has treated people of color, why would they have faith in the system listening to them?
Right.
The history in housing or voting?
Absolutely.
Feel comfortable. So I do feel comfortable in a school setting. I do feel comfortable going and voting. Why don't I call up one of my friends of color that I have a relationship with and be like, hey, come with me. I'll go with you. I can advocate for you if something happens. I can speak up. And again, I want to emphasize that it has to happen in the context of a relationship. I don't want people to go having these weird phone calls and be like, hey, I saw this guy on the internet and he told me to. No, that's not what I said. So don't blame me in something awkward. I think there's a lot of power in that relationship and that invitation.
You know, I've been thinking this so much lately. I am by nature an awkward person and I have no filter. And like, I could see myself in like a grocery store if I have like a stereotypical thought where I'm like, oh, they're probably stealing something. And that, like, if it goes through my mind, I could see myself going up to that person and being like, hey, I just want to apologize for the thought that went through my mind. And I'm like, I should not tell people to do this. I probably would, but I should not give this advice because it's like the same thing. Like, don't go searching on white pages. Like, Black family in area. Like, just make a friend.
Yeah, no. I relationships. It takes. If you see an injustice happening, by all means, speak up. Even if you don't have a relationship, don't be like, "Well, I'm not going to say anything because I don't know that person." But when it comes to inviting to go with you, I think there's a trust factor that needs to happen with that. So just be mindful of that.
So good. So good. I would love, because I know you just put in a lot of work, just inward walking through this topic. And so can you share with some people what have been maybe like the hardest things that you had to understand as you've walked through systematic racism and all that comes with it?
I can tell you one of my earlier experiences that was an aha moment that I always come back to. And again, it relates to basketball and this youth group. So, you know what it's funny. I think about this all the time. When I decided to pursue youth ministry, I thought, oh, I'm going to go and try to change some people's lives and I'm going to go and teach them something. And I don't know how much I did for these kids, but they have changed my life and we're still friends to this day. And it's just humbling. So
Yeah.
I just always think about that whenever I tell any of these stories.
I'm a student pastor. Did you know that?
You're a what?
I'm a youth pastor.
Oh, nice.
That's that, like, it's like a very awkward, you're like, is this working? Am I making them worse? Like,
yeah.
It's just no clear.
I'm a fairly new parent and I have that thought all the time too. So anyway, I was playing basketball with one of the youth members and I haven't explicitly gotten his permission to tell the story, so I'll leave his name out of it.
Yeah.
But he's Black, I'm white, and we went to the park and we were playing with these guys who were all Black. And so I just noticed that we didn't know them, and I just noticed that he had this rapport with them and this comfortability. And he and I had known each other for like 8 or 9 years at that time, and we were pretty close. And so afterward, I'm like, I just noticed that you seemed so much more comfortable with them, and there was this rapport, and you and I have known each other for so long, and what's up with that? And he said that he asked me some questions. It's like, have you ever had anybody cross the street when you're coming or hold their purse or their kid closer as you pass by? And he asked some other questions like that. And some I had experienced, but fleetingly.
Right.
Back when I was a teenager and I had long hair and ripped up denim jacket and that kind of stuff. I'm sure I did make people uneasy, but all I had to do was change my clothes and I'm not going to present like that anymore.
Right.
Everybody mistrusts teenagers, but all I have to do is wait a little bit, grow up, and then that's not going to be the case. But if you feel like that's happening because of the color of your skin, you can't change that.
Right.
The thing that took me a while to understand, oh yeah, I've experienced discrimination. Well, yeah, maybe a little bit, but use that as a launching point for establishing common ground rather than discounting somebody else's experience. What do you mean experience discrimination? So do I. It's not that big of a deal. Right. No, it's different. Right. Listen to the person. So the student and I had this conversation, and he said that just by looking at the color of their skin, I know that we have experienced something in common, probably. And you and I, no offense, you're not going to experience those things. And so I have this common bond with them that I can recognize on site. And that just really got me thinking, man, what else is different along those lines?
Yeah.
Again, I started it was right around the time that I was in grad school as well. So some of these things that I was reading and listening to in graduate school and some of these conversations that I was having just kind of woke me up to, maybe things are different.
Right.
Again, I know I keep saying this, but I just started to listen more, because before I was quick to say, oh, they're playing the race card and why don't they clean up their communities? And what about black on black crime and that kind of stuff? And okay, hold on. Listen, have a dialogue. Let somebody talk to me about that. I don't have to agree with everything they say, but I've just really learned a lot about what privilege is and isn't, what racism is and isn't.
Yeah.
So that was an early one.
Mm.
It was an early experience.
Yeah.
The idea of racism and white supremacy also took me a while to wrap my head around, because if you define racism as individual acts of aggression, like calling somebody the N-word, if you don't do that, it's easy to kind of absolve yourself and say, well, I don't have anything to do with that.
Yep.
Racism is broader than that.
Right.
It's the system of advantages and power.
Yeah.
And so it took me a while to realize that, yeah, I do have something to do with racism. Does that make me a racist? I don't know. I don't think it's productive to call me a racist. So I want to acknowledge that I am participating in a racist system, and I'm trying to help dismantle it. But define racism in this narrow way, I can easily say, well, I don't do that. Same with white supremacy. When we think of supremacy, we think of the KKK, and it's like, well, I don't do that, so I'm not part of white supremacy.
Yep.
And listen, white supremacy is the system that favors whites and treats whites as the norm and others as outside of the norm.
Yeah.
So that's a conversation. So those are some of the aha moments and the miscommunications and misconceptions in my journey.
Well, and I think it's so powerful. I want to talk on this white supremacy because this is such a trigger word for so many people. And I've kind of learned over the last few weeks, this conversation is a lot like jumping into really cold water, where there's like this initial shock and it's like, I have to get out. I don't want to do this. It's not me. I'm done. And there's like this initial shock. And then you recognize that like, it's not as bad. Like, I don't want to say it's not as bad. Systematic racism is bad, but there's an adjustment period where you realize like white supremacy, we're not talking about you as an individual person. This is years of oppression at work. And I think this is such a hard thing. And so I would love, can you talk specifically to the white person, maybe middle class, maybe, I don't know, somewhere between 30 and 50, that is sitting there going, I don't understand all of this. I'm frustrated because all lives matter to me and I care about Black people, but I'm not racist. I'm not part of the problem. Can you talk specifically to that person?
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to educating yourself about some of those trigger words and making sure you understand how they might mean something different to somebody else. And I know I keep mentioning this, but really listening and catching yourself with that reaction to the cold water that, oh, wait, no, and about privilege and white supremacy and racism, and really just, well, to keep with the water analogy, immersing yourself in that and listening and getting used to the other implications of it.
Yeah.
I would encourage people to think about what might be normal for you or not a big deal for you, and how that might be a big deal for somebody else. I mean, you could take a lot of different things. You could take mispronouncing names. Yeah, white people have their names mispronounced all the time. But if you have that happen to you over and over again, coupled with this feeling of not feeling welcome, like in a classroom, that has a different kind of psychological toll. So to me, it's not that big of a deal. I correct the teacher and move on. But that's because there's not this association with all this other stuff that has happened. Again, if there are places that it's no big deal for me to go to, why would it be a big deal for somebody else to go to? My wife has actually helped me to understand that a lot, as we talked about how she navigates the world differently as a woman. I take for granted that I can go places by myself and it's no big deal. And then she said, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that.
Right.
Why not? And so once I, again, listened, I realized, just because I think something is normal or not that big of a deal doesn't mean it's not that big of a deal to somebody else.
Right.
In my profession, education, we see that a lot. Again, I have had a pretty positive experience with school, and so have my parents and grandparents and all of that. And so it's pretty easy for me to have confidence in the school system that I'm going to be able to, I believe what they say, that I can get a good education and that'll propel me to future success and open up a lot of doors. If you or your historical family have not had those kind of positive interactions, if there's always been this, well, what are they doing in this AP class? Or, oh, that's a pleasant surprise. Oh, you speak so well. You don't have an accent.
Right.
And these other things that just kind of make you feel like, is this really for me? Do I really belong here?
Right.
Then it just, again, that history matters. And I think it's important for us as white people to understand that just because something is not that big of a deal to us doesn't mean it's not a big deal to others. And the only way we can learn that is by establishing these trusting relationships and having these conversations.
Yeah.
Before then, I think it's incumbent upon white people to educate themselves on things like privilege, racism, white supremacy, this idea of white fragility, which is what you talked about, that white people have a difficult time engaging in conversations of race because it's so uncomfortable, because they take it personally, like, you mean I am a racist, I am bad? Well, no. There's this great analogy that racism is like smog. We're all smog breathers. And that smog is going to affect some people more than others. And that's a really good way of thinking about it. So not that I'm calling you out for something individual that you did, but you're in the system, you're breathing this smog. So
Right.
I think that analogy helped me to understand that racism is not just these individual things, it's the stuff around us that affects some people more than others.
Yeah. And I think what I've been learning through the Black Lives Matter movement and everything going on is it's not enough to not stand for. You really have to take a stand against, because kind of playing the middleman is picking a side. And early on in the conversations, one of my friends, Crystal, she sent me the Martin Luther King quote that said, the silence of your friends will be remembered more than the words of your enemies. And I just feel like this is so powerful, which is why we have to keep this conversation going. It's because it's not enough to have a Black Lives Matter Spirit Week. At some point, the marches will slow down and things will start to shift. And so how do we then continue to push this agenda to get more of an equal level playing field, equality and justice in our culture and generation? And so that being said, I would love, could you give us some practical things that you have read, maybe your favorite books, favorite podcasts you've listened to, give people some tangible things that you're like, this was really helpful for me.
Sure. And let me preface that by saying that what has really helped me in my journey is those personal conversations. And so, again, I know I keep saying this, but that's really where my heart is. We have to get to the point where we have a good enough relationship with people who think differently, that we can have that conversation. Because I can read whatever I want on the internet or in a book, and that doesn't really speak to my personal world.
Yeah.
What
Before you go further, can you stop and pause? How would people meet those friends? Any thoughts?
I use your existing relationships, and I want to throw in a word of caution here because, again, my privilege shows here. It's fairly easy for me to talk about issues of race because I have not been on the sharp end of that. I have not experienced the trauma that people of color have. So this is something that took me a while to learn. So by me approaching a person of color and asking them, well, what do you think about this Black Lives Matter movement? What do you think about police brutality? What do you think about racism? That's asking them for emotional labor and to kind of relive some trauma. Yeah. So white folks need to start by doing some reading and talking with other white people, and then using some connections and relationships, because you don't want to approach a person of color that you don't know and be like, hey, I really want to help. Can we talk about this?
Yeah.
It's nice, but again, that's a big ask. So start with people, and I'll volunteer myself. I can have some of those conversations so you can do some of the background work on your own. You know what people are talking about when they talk about racism and white supremacy and privilege and that kind of stuff. Start with other white folks. Use their connections to talk with people who already have a relationship, and kind of the precedent for talking about this, people of color. So I can introduce you to some folks, but start with other white folks and start with some readings. We have to listen to people of color, but again, it takes a special relationship to ask for that kind of emotional labor.
Right. Well, and I think it's so important to what you said, because this is a lot of white, and I'm victim to this too. When all this began, this is where I stood. It's like, I'm white, but I don't know where to start. And that can no longer be an excuse. We have to be willing to learn. And I'm even learning that a lot of the questions I would want to ask one of my Black friends has already been answered in a book. Yeah. And so, and it is because it's an emotional toll that we're asking them to embark on. And I'm so thankful for the ones that have let me learn and will answer the questions. But I think that's just such powerful advice of stop maybe looking towards the Black person for answers and pick up a book, because the answers are in the book.
Right. Wait until there's that relationship and that trust until you're more in a position to be an ally.
Yeah.
Rather than asking out of curiosity for something that's a big deal to them. And
Right.
again, it goes back to understanding that, okay, it's not that racism isn't a big deal to me. It's not as personal to me. I literally don't have as much skin in the game as a person of color. And so understanding that, okay, it's just a conversation to me, but that could be really intense for somebody else. So
Right.
establish those relationships and build that trust, partially through reading, partially through talking with other white folks, do some of that background work.
Yeah.
I can show some books here. I don't know. Did you enable screen sharing? Can I share my screen?
I don't know if I did enable it.
Okay. If you can do that, I want to share a website that I'm working on that helps exactly that. The whole point of me creating this website was to help people answer the question, what's holding you back from doing anti-racist work? That was one of the most profound questions that I ever encountered. And as I reflected on it, I realized I've had many answers to that. First and foremost, I don't know what you mean by anti-racist work. I am not a racist. What do you mean by anti-racist? And then also, I'm not sure how I feel about Black Lives Matter, or I support all lives matter. I support blue lives matter. What about black on black crime? Or, okay, I'm in, but where do I start?
Right.
Or if I feel alone, how can I find allies? So on this website that I'll share momentarily.
I think you should be able to share it. Yep.
Yeah, I got it. So the site URL, I'm highlighting it right now in obnoxious yellow.
Cool. And I can put these resources on my website. Is this a shareable link?
Yeah, you can use this link, tinyurl.com/discussing race and racism.
Awesome.
Be creative with that, you can tell. So that'll take you to this document, which is under construction, but you see a little bit of background here. That note that I just made about asking people of color for emotional labor.
Yeah.
And then these are some of the answers that I've had throughout my life to the question, what's holding you back from doing anti-racist work? So again, number one, I'm not sure what you mean by anti-racist. I want to do that work, but I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Any ideas of what to do? Everyone has faced discrimination, including me. I think is it really necessary? Is this too big of a deal? What about other things? What about sexism? What about domestic violence, which has increased during the COVID era? What about those? Why are we talking about race so much? So ultimately what I want to do with this site, and I'm still working on it, is if you're struggling with number one, click on that one. It'll take you to a different document where I share a little bit of my journey with that, and I link some resources that are specific to that. You want to hear about number four, that, yeah, I've tried to do that and I feel attacked and made to feel guilty for being white. Okay, click on that. And I have some advice personally and some resources that'll help. It's coming.
Yeah.
But now I think this is a great question for white people to ask themselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yep.
You at least can see that, hey, I've navigated these questions as well. So down here, I have a bunch of articles and resources, and I've identified ones that are really good starting points. There are some books, there are some videos, talks, articles. So these are really good starting points.
Cool.
And there are some books that are good starting points.
Can the public view this? Is this like a link that anybody can view?
Yeah, so if you go to tinyurl.com/discussing race and racism, it'll take you to this document, which is set for anybody to view it. And you can click on any of these links and either go to the actual video or article, or you can go to an Amazon description of the book so you can see what it is and get some copies.
Cool.
And I'm adding to this, but you can see all kinds of resources there. Because my background is in education, I included a whole section on teaching resources for advancing anti-racist work. So again, this is under construction. It needs to be organized and finished. So don't judge me too much on the state of it, but you can see where I'm coming from and what I'm trying to do with that.
Well, and it's just so important to start. I said to someone the other day, this is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
And so we're really going to have to start doing the reading and the studying and not making it a spirit week, but making this actual strides towards breaking down systematic racism and finding our part.
Right. I did put on here my email address, and there's also a survey that people can fill out. And if you go on there, sign up on here for a conversation. And that way, when I do a Facebook Live or anything like that, I can email people and let them know. We can also talk on the phone or correspond via email. We could do a Zoom like this. I just want to be a resource.
Yeah.
Again, I'm super enlightened, but I just want to be a resource for other people who are on this journey. So you can sign up for individual conversations or group events or whatever.
Yeah, that's great. And so if you're watching this, I will put this on my website. I'll also put it in the comments below or in the description below, so that way you can access it, because this is an awesome resource. 2 favorite books of all of them. What are your 2 favorites?
I would probably start with, well, can I throw a movie in there?
Yeah, you can throw a movie in there.
I think The Hate You Give is.
I just watched it.
Yeah, and read the book and watch the movie, because there's a difference between the two, and they both lead to some great conversations. But I think this is timely. The character goes through many of the same things that are happening now.
Yeah.
And so that's good. This one, Waking Up White by Debbie Irving. It's on the list on that website. This one's really good. She's really candid about, hey, I grew up in a white, fairly insulated area, and this is how I became more aware of how it might be different for other people. And then this one, So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Alua. This one, I mean, the title says it all. It has really practical steps for engaging in racial dialogue and some things that you need to know before engaging in racial dialogue.
Yeah.
So I think those 2 are really good, accessible starting points.
Sweet.
If you want something a little bit more historical, then this one is good. Give Us the Ballot. It's about the fight for voting rights, and that came in a couple different waves. The 15th Amendment gave African Americans the right to vote, but on paper, not really.
Right.
And so it talks about all of that, and even modern day impediments to voting.
Yeah. Hey, will you mind knocking off your screen share so we can see you bigger? So we can see books?
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I was trying to figure it out, and I was like, I can't figure it out, so it's fine.
No, I got it. So yeah, here.
Give us the ballot.
Ballot.
White. Oh,
So You Want to Talk About Race and Waking Up White.
Good deal.
Then another one that has a great title. It's more psychological, sociological. Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? Classic book, asks and answers that question. This is where that smog analogy comes in.
Yeah.
And just some really good resources for starting. But again, check out that website for some other ones. If you don't have time to read a book, I do recommend audiobooks, especially if you have a sizable commute. That's fantastic. But there's a lot of shorter articles on that website that kind of get to the same place.
Sweet. All right. One piece of encouragement for people on this journey.
Well, it's no surprise that I would say this. It's just keep the conversation going. Yeah. Don't shut it down. Don't get defensive. Just because you talk to one person who may offend you or you don't agree with, it doesn't mean that other people who are like them think the same way. So keep the conversation going. And white folks, talk to other white folks first, do a little bit of that background research and reconnaissance, I guess, and then keep trying to establish relationships of trust with people of color so you can invite them in and they can invite you in and you can be a better ally.
Good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hanging out today. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for hosting.
I feel like I learned a lot. So I hope that others that are watching this as well have learned. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going.
Thanks, Britt. Take
No
care.
problem. See ya.